Much, and last but by no means least, as chair of the C40, Mayor Miller, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thank you to Monday Morning and the City of Copenhagen, through you, Lord Mayor, for the very gracious invitation to speak at this session, and to our colleague from Beijing, congratulations on the scale of what you're doing. It's quite remarkable to hear from Beijing. And it's also remarkable to see what Copenhagen is doing as a real leading city. And to the people over there, hello. So I apologize if I check my great Canadian technology here in the BlackBerry. It's only because I don't have a watch. So I'm just checking the time. I thought I would use my 5 minutes, Mark, just to speak a little bit about what cities are doing together around the world and use some examples from Toronto to show that we can both fight climate change and create the jobs of the future. And I think politically it's extremely important to do that. I understand the next speaker from the London School of Economics will be speaking about the politics of climate change. And if we want to succeed, we need to both create the jobs of the future and show people what they are, because people who hold the jobs of the past that are polluting jobs vote. We need people to be holding the jobs of the future. And I think in Denmark you've gone a long way to do this through a number of your strategies, and there are strategies that we admire in Canada. So the C40 is a group of cities, roughly speaking, the 20 largest cities in the developing world and the 20 largest in the developed world. Copenhagen is an affiliate member and a very prominent and important one. And our goal is to work together to share best practices and to share innovations. We partner with a little bit with the Climate Group and with the Clinton Climate Initiative to do exactly that. For example, in Copenhagen last December, we announced a pilot project in 14 of the cities about electric vehicles, where we'll work together to develop common standards for charging stations and so forth, working with the electric vehicle manufacturers. Within those cities, and there's a common challenge in all cities. How do you fight climate change in cities and create jobs? It's through emissions from buildings, from energy, and from transport. The percentages differ a little bit depending on the city, but those are the sectors that you need to address. And between the various C40 cities, we've probably retrofitted about 500 million square feet of buildings, to give you an example of what are some of the things we can do. In Toronto's case, we started with a strategy. It's called Changes in the Air. It's our clean air and climate change strategy. It's a companion piece to our economic development strategy, which has a section on green jobs and greening our economy. The climate change strategy passed City Council unanimously. And in my political context, there aren't political parties. The mayor has one vote of 45 on City Council. So to have a strategy like this pass unanimously, I think, shows broad public support for fighting climate change and creating jobs. Well, how are we doing that? Well, in common with other C40 cities, we're doing energy retrofits on building. That's not glamorous, but it's extremely important and cost-effective. One of our projects is called Tower Renewal. Toronto has about 1,000 apartment buildings that were built in the 1960s out of concrete. The good thing about concrete buildings is they're built to last 100 years. The bad thing is concrete has no insulating power whatsoever. So in a climate like Toronto's that has extremes of cold in the winter and a great deal of heat in the summer, they're incredible wasters of energy. So in partnership with the University of Toronto and two architects, we developed a system of doing retrofits by adding external cladding, which allows you to do a whole range of things, like put in geothermal, solar panels. It allows you to use the green space around the buildings for urban farms, perhaps rezone them for shopping. The projects have a payback of about 7 years. And we estimate in the 1,000 buildings will create 30,000 union trade skilled jobs for people doing that work. So it creates jobs, fights climate change, and that one program alone will lower our greenhouse gas emissions by about 5%. Now, we had a little problem financing them because there weren't the technical ways, even though the projects pay for themselves. Another C40 member, Melbourne in Australia, was working on similar strategies, and it came up with a way to finance them that required a minor regulation change from the state government. We have a similar legal system to Melbourne, so we're doing the same thing in Ontario. And that's how cities are working together. Second example for us, and I mention it because it's a parallel to Copenhagen, we have a district energy company called Enwave. It supplies district heating and cooling. The cooling cools the office towers in Toronto. And to give you some perspective, Toronto's the heart of the Canadian economy. About 1 in 5 jobs in Canada are within an hour's drive of Toronto City Hall. It's a very important economic job generator, and the financial services is very important to us. There's a lot of tall office towers, and about 90% of their need for air conditioning has been met by deep lake water cooling. Copenhagen's project to use seawater to do that is a unique technology. We didn't believe it was possible. The Danish made it possible, and I believe that's one that can be exported to cities around the world. Another example of cities working together in parallel. 2 more examples if I've got the time, Mark.
Sure, go ahead.
In transport, we are building a plan called Transit City, which is to build light rail transit mostly above ground because it's relatively inexpensive, and build 130 kilometers of light rail. Toronto's blessed. We've got a great transit system, but it was built a generation ago for a city of about 1.5 million people. We're now the heart of an urban region of 6 million. And the transit system has not kept up with the growth of the city, which means that the majority of people are car dependent. Although we're not quite as far along as Copenhagen with the bicycle, we don't have our own bike that we've invented, for example, unlike Copenhagen. We are working very hard on public transport because there's no way for a city to grow in a dense fashion, which is also important if we're going to fight climate change, people living and working close together without a modern transit system. The final point I wanted to make is about garbage. People in Toronto, under a system we developed, separate into recycling, wet waste, and things that can't be recycled or are not wet waste. The wet waste, we are building a large plant to generate electricity from methane gas recapture. We also own a landfill, and we're going to use methane gas recapture there in quite an interesting way. We're going to pipe it about 1 kilometer to a local farm, and the waste heat will be used in industrial-sized greenhouses to grow food, and the methane itself will be used to generate electricity and sold back into the grid, which will make the city money. And of course, methane's a terribly polluting gas. One of the other cities that's doing this in the C40 is Sao Paulo. They have the largest landfill in South America, and they're generating something like 7% of the electricity for a heavy industrialized city from their methane recapture. Now, I'm not sure they're also growing food. I think Toronto's ahead of the curve there, but I love the idea that we're growing food from the wet waste that comes from our garbage. That, to me, is permanently sustainable. These and other strategies in the C40 cities are addressing climate change today. In the City of Toronto's case, amongst our operations, not the geographic area, amongst what we control, our emissions are 40% below 1990, predominantly from the methane gas recapture. And if the City of Toronto, as an institution, can do it, we believe that anyone can do it. And the final point I want to make, in all of the things I've mentioned, whether in Toronto or in other C40 cities, sometimes there's an upfront investment, but in the end, you always end up saving money, particularly in energy retrofits. So you can save money, fight climate change, and create jobs. I think that's a win for everybody.
Great,
Back to you, Mark.